After going through this video, you will be able to explain React and its importance, install Babel extension for VS Code. Hi, how are you? So the last module was a challenging one, but I'm happy and proud to see how far you have come along in this training. You've learned about various front-end and back-end technologies with ease that have their own merits and potential and will eventually help you to create a functional web application. So, without waiting any longer, it's time to learn and discuss the last and final web technology of this training, and that is React. Before we move forward and see what React is all about, let us go through some interesting facts about it. React was originally created by Jordan Walke, who is a software engineer working at Facebook. He developed React back in 2011, which was then implemented in Facebook's newsfeed and in Instagram in 2012. It is also called React.JavaScript, which means the same as React. Just like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, React is also a front-end web technology and is one of the most popular technologies for building user interfaces. Also, when we create a website using React, it is called a React app. We will be using this word quite often in the upcoming videos, so please make a note of it. Now, you might think, we have already learned a few front-end web technologies in this training that help us to build a user interface. So why are we studying React? What is its importance? Well, let me explain this through this simple example. Suppose you want to make a sandwich. One way is to take the vegetables like tomato, onion, cucumber, olives, etc. and start slicing them one by one to make a sandwich. And the other way is to simply take the pre-cut slices of these vegetables from a container and put them together to make a sandwich. Now, which way seems convenient and easier? For most of us, the second way might seem easier as it saves time and is more convenient. Some of us may argue that they both take almost equal time to prepare. So, let me modify our example a bit. What if we have to prepare lots and lots of sandwiches? Now, which way will we choose? Here, the second way will be much more convenient because in this case we can cut all the vegetables at once, and while making the sandwiches we can simply focus on putting the ingredients between the bread, rather than switching between cutting the vegetables and putting them between the bread for each sandwich every time. Similarly, React helps us to build user interfaces using small reusable pieces of code which we call as components. We pick these components to build the front-end part of a web page. So before we continue to see how we can use React, let us first put a formal definition to it. React is a JavaScript library that is used to build user interfaces. And by JavaScript library, we mean that it is a JavaScript file that contains some predefined functions which we can use in our JavaScript code to accomplish complex tasks with ease. It is far more efficient and flexible than most of the front-end web technologies available today. Let me show you how React helps us to create user interfaces with the help of an example. Suppose we want to add a functionality where a user has to simply hover the cursor over an image in order to view it rather than clicking on it. We can easily do this using HTML and JavaScript code. But what if we have to create 10 to 15 such images with exactly the same functionality? We will have to repeat the code for each of these images. So here comes React into the picture. By using React, we can write code to create the image with the said functionality and simply clone this image to create the rest of the images, and thus helping us to build HTML elements for our web page. Moving further, let us now see how we can use React in our code. To do this, we need to take care of two things. First, we need to understand how we can add the React library in our JS code. Second, we need to install the Babel.js extension for VS Code. Let us discuss these points one by one, starting with the first one. Writing React code is simply writing JavaScript code, but using functionality present in the React library. We can simply add a React code file like any other JavaScript file using the script tag. But here, we will change the name of the file. We will use the name app with the extension JS, as we will be using this file to write our JavaScript code that uses React functionalities. But using this line of code does not ensure that we can write React code. Let us understand why. because in our code, we have not added any React library. So to add a React library, we need to add these two lines of code above this custom JavaScript file. The first line of code corresponds to the core library, and the next line of code is specific to websites. Note that React will only work if we have added these two React libraries in the same order, followed by the custom JavaScript file. This is a rule that you need to remember. After this, let us now move to the second point, that is to install Babel JavaScript extension for VS Code Editor. Before we install this extension, let us see why it is required. Using this extension highlights the syntax where we have used React in our code. Let us see how we can install it. Open your VS Code and then press Ctrl and P together. This will open a dialog box like this. Enter the command ext install mgm cder mot.vscode-language-babel and press enter. Don't worry, you don't need to remember this command. You can copy and paste it from below the video. Once we press enter, the dialog box will move to the left side of the screen and we will see a small text installed with a tick mark. This means that we have successfully installed the Babel extension for the VS Code. You are now all set to use React. Let us learn more about this fantastic technology in the next topic. Bye-bye. After going through this video, you will be able to create an HTML element using React. Hi, welcome back. In the previous topic, we learned about React and how it is used to build user interfaces. In this topic, we will see how we can create an HTML element using React. We know that a JavaScript library contains some predefined functions that help us to accomplish complex syntax with ease. Similarly, in React, we have two such libraries, React and React DOM, that contain createElement function and render function respectively. These functions collectively are used to create an HTML element. Let us understand these functions one by one in detail, starting with the createElement inside the React library. In React, the name of the function is always preceded by the library name inside which it is present. Like in this case, we have the name of the function as react.createElement. So, createElement is the name of the function which is present inside the React library. There are numerous things which we can do with React, but as we are a beginner level student, let us start with the simplest example to understand, because once a solid foundation is built, everything later will seem easy. So, say we want to create a heading for a page using the h1html tag, and this is a heading for the page. The first step is to create a React element object, or we call it a JavaScript object. So, here we are calling the react.createElement function, and whatever it returns, we are storing it in a variable named heading. The second step is to pass the arguments. This function takes 3 arguments. The first argument is a string that represents the type of HTML element we want to create. The second argument is expected to be a JavaScript object that contains all the attributes that we want the HTML element to have. And lastly, the third argument is a string that represents the content that will go inside the element. We can also add a child element instead of content as an argument, which we will see later in this video. Now, if you think that this piece of code is sufficient to create an HTML element in React, we are missing something important. Remember earlier in this video we said that to create an HTML element, we need two functions, createElement and render. So far, we have only used the createElement function that is used to create a JavaScript object that describes the element which we want to create. Let us see in what way the render function helps us to create an HTML element. It helps us to render and display the React element object on the web page. So, what we need to do is to pass the JavaScript object which we created using the createElement function as an argument like this. See, the first argument here is the React element or the JavaScript object. The second argument is the HTML element from the DOM, inside which we want to create this new element. The document.getElement by ID React container will fetch the HTML element with ID equal to the React container. This is the container element inside which the new element will be rendered by React. It is okay if this syntax seems difficult at this moment, just give it some time. You will be able to understand things more clearly as we progress along in this module. Before we proceed any further, let us see the full-blown code which we have written until now. It will give us a fresh perspective to understand what we have done so far. This is our HTML code. We have our page title, then we have our CSS file. We have added a few styling to the sheet. This CSS works exactly the same way that you have learned in this training. So don't worry about the code, you can copy it from below the video. This is the container element which we were talking about a few moments ago. Then we have the React libraries and the custom JavaScript file. Now, let us look at the code of the custom JavaScript file, app.js, in which we have our React code. This part corresponds to the create element function and this part for the render function. I hope things are clear at this point. So let us run this code. In our browser's address, we will enter 127.0.0.1 /react project /index.html. As for React, we have created a new project folder. So don't forget to update the file path in the address bar. We get the output as expected, nothing new in this. Well, there is something new, and to find it, we need to dig a little bit. Let us open the page source and see if you can find anything odd or missing. Pause the video and take your time to find the missing thing out. If you look carefully, there is no h1 tag in the code, but there is a h1 tag in the web page. How is it possible? The answer to this question we have discussed in the first topic of the JavaScript module. See if you can recall it. The reason we can't see the h1 tag is because it is added to the web page by the JavaScript after the response has come from the web server, and that's how React works. And if we see the inspect element, we can see the h1 element is present inside the React container with all the attributes we have provided. This is because the inspect element shows the code as it is at that moment. Now another important thing, we should notice that if we add anything inside the React container, like I'm adding some random text, the render file will replace the entire text with the newly created element. And if we view the page source, we can see the text we entered. All this change of text happens after the response has come from the server. So this code was all about creating a single HTML inside a React container. Suppose we want to add another element or a group of elements inside a React container. How can we do this? Well, the approach is similar to what we have followed previously. So let me see how many steps you have remembered for creating an HTML element. Similar to what we did for the heading element, we will create a new element for the paragraph. Here we have our function, then we have p as the first argument as the element type is a paragraph. As we are not adding any attribute to this element, so we will pass null as an argument. Please note that the null is without the inverted commas. And in the third argument, we will pass the paragraph content. Now that we have created the paragraph element, we need to create one container element, that is, div to keep both the heading and paragraph elements together inside a single element. This is because we can render only one element inside the React container. To do this, we will use the create element function. The first argument we will pass is the name of the element, that is div. In the second argument, to add a class attribute to any HTML element, we will have to use class name instead of class, as a class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, which has some special meaning. So inside the curly braces, we add the class name as box like this. Now pay attention, as this is important and new information. Earlier in the video, we talked that we can pass the child element as the third argument. But here, we have two child elements, that is heading and paragraph. So, we will pass the heading and paragraph as third and fourth argument respectively, as these are child to the div element. So this makes our total number of arguments to 4. Please note that it is not a rule or defined anywhere that we can have only 3 arguments. We can have n number of arguments as it depends from code to code. Also, all the elements will be added to the div element in the same order as we are passing them in the arguments. So, suppose if we pass the paragraph argument first and then the heading argument, they will be created in the order we have added, that is paragraph first and heading second. Next, we will render the box object instead of the headings object, because if we do that, only the headings element will get created. Let us run the code. Here we go. We can see the heading and the paragraph HTML elements. To summarize, we generalize the heading and paragraph HTML elements inside the box element through React functions. And then, using the React DOM.render function, we added the elements inside our HTML. After watching this video, you might wonder or feel that the code we have written to create 3 simple HTML elements is very complicated. But let me assure you, as we progress, things will become simple and you will understand the significance of why we are using React. So that's it for this video. Hope you had fun learning. Up next is a quiz. All the best. Hi there. Welcome to the next module. In this video, we will see how to create a React project on mobile. This is pretty simple as we have done similar things multiple times by now. So let's get started and see how we can write and execute React code using the SPCK code editor. Go to the project section and select the React 16 System.js project. This will create another project folder with some default files. Here, first create a proper folder structure. That is, we will create a CSS and JS folder separately inside the main project folder, so that you can place the files accordingly. Now that we have created the folders, let's come to the default files inside the project folder. One is app.js, then we have config.js, and lastly we have index.html. Please do not delete any of these files, as we may want to use these files to write our custom code. For now, what we have done is, we have directly imported this code file from my Google Drive and placed the necessary files inside the folders accordingly. Let us run one React code. Don't worry about this app.js, index1.html, and app.cs codes at the moment, since you will write this code and understand it step by step in this module. If we run the HTML code, you can see the React code is running. Now, The code might throw an error message at the bottom because you need a Babel extension to execute the code. But do not worry, as the code will still execute every time despite this error message. As mentioned earlier, mobile development in mobile is still evolving. So you might face similar hiccups like these while running React codes. Again, we will emphasize coding in mobile will be challenging at times, but it is certainly doable. Try to figure out ways if you get stuck anywhere by searching for solutions online. And don't hesitate to even try some new code editors. So that was all about how you can code and execute React web technologies on mobile. See you soon in the next video. Bye bye. After going through this video, you will be able to explain JSX, create React elements using JSX. Hi, welcome back. Before we get into the details of this topic, I have one interesting riddle for you. Suppose you want to go from home to your friend's home. One way is to walk to your friend's home by crossing the park, and another way is to wait for an auto and then take it, which will take a longer route. Now, which way will you choose to reach your friend's home? Obviously, the first way, that is by walking, as it is the shortest route. Now, in the last video, we saw that something that could have been done by writing a few lines of HTML, we wrote long React codes. Well, this sounds contradictory. If we prefer shortcut ways or ways that would take lesser time and effort, then why would we write longer code? This sounds confusing. Just to create a simple HTML element that can be done using line of code, we are writing multiple lines of code using React. Does this sound logical? No, right? So, what is the purpose of studying React at all then? Well, don't worry. The basics that we learned so far about React was to get you familiar with it. React uses a friendlier syntax to create HTML elements using something called JSX. JSX is an extension to the JavaScript language that is used with React to create element, and it resembles writing HTML. Let's see how it is used. So, this was our React code which we used in the previous topic to create a heading element. And using JSX, we can write the same code like this. We can see how we have done away with the create element, which was making things unnecessarily complicated. But remember, this is JSX and not an HTML code or a valid JS code. As we will no longer be using this JS code, we will comment it out. Similarly, for the paragraph element, we can write the JSX code like this. You can see how simple things have become using JSX. There is absolutely no need to write lengthy codes. In fact, using JSX, we can define the complete parent box element. Here, we have defined a variable box for the entire div element, which contains a code that looks similar to normal HTML that we use. We start with the div element that contains h1 and paragraph HTML elements. Note that we have added parentheses here. These are not mandatory, however, they provide good readability. So it is a good practice to add parentheses whenever we have more than one line of JSX code. As we have written the parent box element JSX code, we can either comment out or delete the h1 and paragraph JSX code because it will be redundant. Let's save our code and check the output. Well, React fails to create the HTML elements. Let's check the error using the inspect element. Can you guess why we got a syntax error while running the JSX code? As discussed earlier in this video, JSX is not a valid JS syntax, which is the reason the browser is unable to interpret what we have written and is giving a syntax error in return. So, what can we do to make our browser understand JSX? To do this, we have to first convert our JSX into JS, which then our browser can understand, that is, into react.createElement function. Don't worry, we are not going to do it manually. We have the Babel compiler which will do this for us. And interestingly, the Babel compiler is available in the form of a JS file over the internet. So in our HTML file, below the React libraries, we will add the Babel compiler inside the script tags. Always ensure that the custom JavaScript file will be added at the end. Now, coming to the custom JavaScript file where we need to make an important change. As we are dealing with a JSX file, so we need to tell our browser that also. we will change the type text/JavaScript to text/Babel so that the browser understands that it needs to change the JSX file to JS file using the Babel compiler. There is a small correction in the app.js code. We don't need to add the semicolon here and here, as they will be printed as such in the output. So let me remove them. Let us again save this code and check the output. Yes, we get the desired output. Now, if we look at the code using the inspect element, we can see that the JSX code has been successfully able to add the HTML elements. Note that if we ever want to see our JSX code will convert to a JS code, we can use an online Babel compiler. We need to type babeljs.io/repl in the address bar. Why don't you give it a try yourself and see how this online converter works? As a starting point, you can download and copy the code even below the video and observe the output. With this, we have come to the end of this video. We will continue to learn more about JSX in the next video. After going through this video, you will be able to explain expressions in JSX. As in Kathakali dance, expressions play an important role that bring more meaning to this dance form. Similarly, expressions in JSX play an important role by giving us the power to add a more dynamic text. Let us see how and what we mean by this statement. And for that, first we need to understand what expressions are. In JSX, everything is an expression if we put it inside curly brackets, which we call JSX expressions. You're familiar with this code as we coded this in the previous video. Let's say we declare one more variable here. Now, to use this variable, we need to add it as a JSX expression by writing the variable name inside the curly braces like this. Now, the moment we enter a curly bracket in the JSX code, it means we are exiting JSX and entering JS. This means the curly brackets let the JSX know that we are writing JS. This means we can write any meaningful JS code inside these JSX expressions. Now, the JSX expressions are not limited to text or strings. We can in fact add mathematical expressions inside the curly braces. First, let me clean up the code. So, look here, even if we add a mathematical expression like 8 plus 5 inside the curly braces, it will get executed. So all in all, we can add a JSX expression anywhere in between the tags. If you're wondering, can we add a JSX expression as a value of an attribute? Well, the answer is yes, we can, and it is too simple. Let us see how. So this was our previous JSX code. Here, in the h1 JSX tag, we have ABC as the attribute value for ID. If we want, we can assign the value ABC to a new variable, say myAttr. We can then use it as a JSX expression instead of the value. Note that when we want to use a JSX expression instead of an attribute value, we do not put it inside inverted commas and nothing more can be appended to it. So this was all about a bit of expression in JSX. I know things are completely different and new at this point, and they might be making things more complicated. But believe me, everything will make more sense as we progress along with this module. You just need to have more patience. See you in the next topic. Up next is a quiz. After going through this video, you will be able to create a component. Hey, welcome back. Earlier, we have only discussed that to make a React app, we use small reusable pieces of code, which we call components. In this video, we will deep dive to understand more about the components, like how we can create one, how we can use them, and much more. And to understand all of these, let us go back to our PG Life project. Here in the property list page, we have several properties that are listed. In our case, we have kept a limited number of properties, but imagine a live running website that may have hundreds of thousands of listed properties. In such cases, React comes into play where each listed property can be seen as a UI component that can be reused. The idea is to think of our entire UI code as small and independent reusable components. For example, the heart inside each property can be treated as an individual component. Now, this heart has one function associated with it. That is, upon clicking, it marks the property as interested. So we need to make sure that whenever we choose a component, it should be as small as possible, and ideally only one responsibility should be associated with one component. If we come across any component that has more than one responsibility, we need to break that component further until it is responsible for exactly one thing. For example, the property card in the property list page can be broken down into single components like stars, heart, and the details of the property. These individual components can then together combine to form a large component with a relatively larger responsibility. And thus, adding these components together, we can eventually form a complete web page. We can alternatively think of it as a jigsaw puzzle. Each little piece has a component, and when combined together, they make a beautiful picture. Now, let us move forward and see how we can create a component. Creating a component is very easy. Just pick the HTML element which we have created and put it inside a function. That's all we have to do. Let us understand this in detail. We will take this HTML element which we have already created. So what we do, instead of storing the JSX code to a variable, we write a function that returns this JSX code. Notice carefully, on the left side we have the variable written in a lowercase, and on the right side we have the function named in capitalized form. The reason for doing this is not to get confused with the names of any existing HTML tags with the names of the function. This is why we generally write the name of the function in a capitalized form. It is not a rule but more of a good convention, so I would recommend you to make a note of it and follow it wherever required. With this, we have created our first ever React component. Well, congratulations for doing such an amazing job. So that's all in this video. In the next video, we will continue to learn a few more exciting things. See you then. Bye bye. After going through this video, you will be able to use a component on a web page, compose large UI components using smaller components. Now that we have created a React component, let us proceed to the next steps. That is, we will understand how we can use a component on a web page. Even though we have defined a function to create a component, we will never call this function directly. Instead, we use a custom JSX tag to use a component, which is just like any other self-closing HTML tag. But make sure that the name of the tag needs to be exactly the same as the name of the function or component. Now the next part is a bit tricky, so please pay more attention. Let us go away with this code to focus only on the component. We've already seen that a JSX tag gets converted to react.createElement function by Babel. Likewise, this component JSX tag is also converted to react.createElement function like this. Here, as a first argument, we have the function that denotes a component. Note that we are not calling the function here as we have not added the parenthesis after the function name. We are just passing the function here. And the second argument is null because we haven't defined any attributes to the custom box tag. Also, there is no third or any following argument because the box tag is a self-closing tag and contains no content within it. So, let us now understand how we can use a component to build a larger UI component. Let us have a look at the code. Here, we have multiple small components which are together making a bigger component, that is app. Also, these components form a parent-child relationship. Using the same approach, the entire UI of a web page is built by composing smaller components into larger parent components that lead to only a single top-level component. And this top-level component is always passed to the React DOM.render function. And that is how the React DOM.render function renders the entire web page. This is the reason we are now passing the app component, the top-level component, instead of the box component. Also, note that since we are using components, we have to pass the components in the form of custom JSX tags. So, this is how we can use a component and compose larger UI components. In the next video, we will continue to learn more about components. After going through this video, you will be able to understand how we can use arrow functions to create a component. We can also write the same code for the React component using arrow functions.
If you don't remember arrow functions, let me quickly refresh your memory. Arrow functions are used when the only role of a function is to return a value. So, using arrow functions, we can rewrite our code for the box component like this. We can further simplify this code by doing away with the curly braces and return statement. If the only thing the function is going to do is returning a value. But let us stick with the curly braces and return statement for now for more clarity. Similarly, we can use the arrow functions for the app component. Before we end this video, let us quickly have a look at the code. This is the HTML code that is unchanged. In the app.js file, this is our box code in which we have used arrow functions. And below it, we have the code corresponding to the app component in which we have again used arrow functions. And then we have this part for the render. So yes, that was all about components in this topic. Hope you had fun watching the video. Up next is a quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to understand and customize components using props. Hi, welcome back. So far we have created two components that display exactly the same content. What if we want to customize this content? For example, I want this one to be as the first heading and this one to be as the second heading. So how can we do that? Well, it is easy to customize the content, and for that we need to understand props. Props, or properties of a component, are information that can be passed to a component just as we pass arguments to a function. The information we pass is further used to customize the content. Let us understand how. So, here you can see that we have passed the props heading to the components as attributes to the custom component tag. The props are then passed the values as first heading and second heading. Also, note that you can name the props as you like. There is no such limitation while naming a prop. Now that we have passed props to a component, we can now use them inside a component just like any variable. So now our component function gets a default argument from React, which is an object that contains a list of all the props passed to the component. We have named the argument as props as a good practice, but you can use any name you want. Since the props here is an object, if we want to access it, we can access it using the dot operator. Now that we have accessed the props, we can use them in any manner we want. I have used it as the content for the h1 HTML tag as an JSX expression inside the curly braces. So before we proceed further, let us first have a look at our complete code. This is our HTML code. And this is our app.js code where we have two components, box and app. So let us execute the code. There you go. You can see that we have been successfully able to customize the content using props. And if you want to compare it with the previous output where we have not used props, you can observe the difference. Well, that was all in this video. In the next video, we will keep on exploring more about props. After going through this video, you will be able to understand why props are uneditable. In the previous video, we saw how we can use props to customize components. Now, let us explore one more important property of props, and that is, props are uneditable. Let us understand what we mean by this statement with the help of this code. So here, we have assigned a new value of the heading props as hello world, overriding the one passed to it. And if we execute the code, it will simply not run and will throw us an error that is no output. This is because props are read-only and cannot be edited within a component. Props are used by components to talk to each other and share information. But information is passed only from a parent component down to a child component. That's how the data can flow. This gives parent component control on what data the child component should display. Like we can change info that we pass to the child components just at one place. And it changes the data to be displayed in the UI inside those components. This also helps us work as a unit. Like we can define a component once and we can leave it. Now, wherever we want to include the component, we can simply call it using the component tags by just passing the relevant information in the form of props. In this case, the box component has a very simple code, but just imagine something very complicated. We would just have to include the components using the tags and relevant props information, and that's it. Hope you have understood the concept of props in this topic. Up next is a quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to create a class component, add a state to the class component. In the previous topic, we learned that props are uneditable. But what if we want information which changes over time, maybe upon some user interaction like click or hover? How can we do that? Let us look at this example to understand this better. Here we have 4 buttons: red, yellow, blue and green. Upon clicking on any of these buttons, the color of the corresponding heading changes. This color change is some information change that is happening on user interaction. If you are wondering how, we are maintaining a color variable which stores the initial color of the heading as black, and on clicking the button we are changing the color accordingly. We then use this color variable as the class name of the heading text to change the CSS accordingly. We have already written the CSS for each of these class names, so as we change the class name, the change in the color will automatically be taken care of. Since the color variable changes over time, we cannot have it as props are uneditable. So, here comes the need of states. States are information associated with a component that allow us to create components that are dynamic and interactive. So here, we will have to maintain a state for the box component that will denote the heading color. On each button click, this information will be changed and affect the heading color accordingly. Let us see how it works. Now, there are 2 ways to create a component. The first one is the functional component, which we have been doing till now. And the second way is the class component, which we will study in a few moments. If we talk about the functional components, they are stateless, which means they cannot handle states. A stateless functional component can simply be seen as a function that takes arguments in the form of props and returns HTML elements in the form of JSX that will be rendered into UI. And if we talk about class components, states are only available to class components. It means that if we want to include states in a component, then we must use the class component. Since our box component is a functional component, let us first see how we can change it into a class component in order to include states to it. Here, we have our old box component code. To make it a class component, we do away with the function and change it to class. Now, the class must extend react.component. In JavaScript, we use extend to create subclasses. Here, we are extending react.component in order to inherit the properties and methods of react.component class so that we can use them in our box component. Now, inside the class, we must define the render method inside a class component. The render method will contain the return statement as it is, so we don't need to make any changes to it. The only change that we now need to make is the way we use the props. In the class component, props are not accessed through arguments as they are in functional components. Here, props is a property of the class component itself that is automatically assigned to an object containing a list of all the props passed to the component. Hence, in the class component, we refer to the props with this.props instead of simply props. This class component will now work the same as our previously written functional components. Next, there is no change in the way we use or include the component, so we don't need to make any change here. The advantage of writing a component as a class component is that whenever in future we need to add a state, we can simply add it without having to make any change in the way we have defined our component. So, now that we have successfully changed the functional component to a class component, let us now see how we can add the buttons which we saw earlier in the video that will change the color of the headings text. So in our class component, just below the P element, we will add the buttons like this. To add a button, we use a button HTML opening and closing tags. And inside this tag, we label the button the way we want. Now that we have added the buttons, let us add the state to our class component. Like props, state is also a property to the component and is an object. But unlike props, we need to explicitly assign it. Whatever state we want to add, it goes as a property inside the state property object. Let's add a color state that will go as a class to the heading text. Let's give it a default value of black. Now, the next part is to make the state change upon clicking the buttons, which we will cover in the next video. Stay tuned. After going through this video, you will be able to capture user interaction using event handlers, change the state upon user interaction. In the previous video, we created a class component, added red, yellow, blue and green buttons and state to our component. So let us continue from where we left. That is, we will change the color state on button click and use this state to color the heading. And for that, we will first need to handle the event, that is, the user clicking on each of the buttons. React has a built-in event handler for click called onClick. React event handlers are similar to JavaScript event handlers, except that they are written in camel case as we have written onClick here. Now, if you don't know what a camel case is, I suggest you explore on the internet and read about it. It is a simple concept. So let us come back to our onClick event handler. To this event handler, we are expected to pass a reference to a function. Let me show you its respective code so as to understand it in a simple way. Don't worry after seeing this code, as you will find a lot of new things which we have not covered until yet. We will understand all of these gradually in this video. So here, you can see we have used the event handler here, here, here and here. The reference we put here should be added as a JSX expression inside the curly braces. Next, on clicking the button, we want to change the component state. And for that, we have created a separate handler method, changeColor, inside the component class, the reference of which we will pass to the onClick event handler. Now, to this changeColor handler, we have passed a specific color as an argument. This is to identify which colored button has been clicked. Please note that as a reference to the component method, we cannot use this.changeColor red or this.changeColor yellow or any of the given colors. This will call the method immediately as the component loads and will not wait for the button to be clicked. Instead, we should use the arrow function notation here like this. Now, when we use the arrow function notation, we are wrapping the function call inside an anonymous function. And we are then passing that anonymous function to onClick event handler. So when we click on any of the buttons, say red, the anonymous function gets called, which contains only one line of code, and that is this.changeColor red, that will call the component handler method and will pass the relevant argument to it. If it sounds complicated, you can remember it as a rule that whenever we use an event handler, we must use the arrow function notation to call the handler method. We can also check the console to see if the changeColor method is getting called or not. To open the console, we will open the inspect element and we'll click on this console tab. Now, let us click the buttons and see if the changeColor method is getting called. There you go. You can see that the method is getting called, which means we are able to capture the user event, and that is click. Now that we are able to correctly capture the user event, let's change the color state. Also, let's use this color state in setting the class for the h1 tag, which will eventually set the color of the heading. As shown earlier, we have already written the CSS for this. So, as the user clicks on the button, the color state will change, and we are using this color state to define the class of the h1 element that will eventually change its color. But, as you can see, we cannot change the state directly. You see that clicking on the buttons has no effect. To do this, we have to use React setState method to make any change on the state variables. The setState method accepts an object that contains a part of the state we want to update along with the updated value. So, we are setting the color to the value being passed to the handler method. This would update the state. Now, if we again click on the buttons, we can see that the color of the headings changes. This means we have successfully changed the state. Note that every time there is a change in the state, the render method in the class component is re-executed to keep the UI updated. It makes a component dynamic and very powerful. Now, if we want to add 2 more blocks of boxes, we will only add these 6 lines of code and that's it. These 2 new boxes will have the same functionalities as the other boxes. Well, that was all about states in this topic. We will learn a few more interesting things about them in the next topic. Stay tuned. Up next is a quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to maintain states in an application, explain how data flows between two components. In the previous topic, we introduced states to our app.js code, and by using them, we were able to change the color of the headings upon user interaction. In this video, we will learn a few more interesting things about states. That is, we will learn what is the best way to maintain the states and how data flows between the components. So, let us see how we can maintain states. To understand this concept, we first need to understand how states are categorized. We can categorize states mainly into two types. The first is the component state and the second is the application state. So far, we have been dealing with the component state in which we define the states to individual components. In React, we have seen that through props, any data can naturally flow down the components tree from a top level component to the child level components. Similarly, states data can also be passed down the component tree via props. But there is no way any data can flow up from a child component to a parent component. So, if states are defined to a child level component, there is no way it can be shared to other top level components. And this restricts the sharing of states across different components. And sometimes we might need to share states across different components as the state data might be needed in those components. For example, as we are changing the color of the heading of this box component, this new component which we just added is also using this information to show the correct stats, that is count. So the color of the box component is actually being shared with this new stats component. So the question arises, how can we share states across different components? Well, the answer is define all the states in the topmost component, which we call as application state. It gives us the flexibility to share state data down to any component in the app via props. Thus, states should be kept together and managed as high up in the application as possible so that all the components can have access to it. And if any data changes at the top, the change will float down through the component tree, updating each component. So this overall top to bottom data flow which we have been talking about since quite some time is known as unidirectional data flow. Let us understand all this with the help of an example. This is the output of our React code which we have written so far along with some additions. Let us discuss what these additions are. Here, instead of 6, we have 7 headings. But if we look at the bottom, we have this entire new section here that indicates total heading color count. It tells real time how many headings are of which color. Let me demonstrate it quickly. If I click on, say, the green button for the first and second heading, it will show the total count of green as 2 and the total count of black as 5. Means that out of 7 headings, 2 headings are of green color and 5 are of black color, which is true. And if we click on any other color, the heading color count will change accordingly. Now, the interesting question that follows is that how are we going to do this? Let us see how. It is pretty interesting. So, this was our previously written code for the app component which we discussed in the previous video. First, we will see how we can maintain this total count. For this, we need access to the color state of each of the box components all at once. And to do this, we need to convert the box component state to application state. This means we will move the color state up to the top level app component. So let us see how we can convert the app component into a class component so that it can store states. And for this, we will add a render function and put the return statement as it is inside the render function. So let us make the changes in the code. Now, the next step is to bring the color state inside the app component like this. Since the color state is associated with each box, we have created a box array state containing the colors for each of the boxes. In fact, we have added even the heading texts as states inside the box array along with the color and are using it from the state to pass it down to the box component via props. Now, instead of using the box component explicitly 6 times, we can iterate through the box array using the JavaScript map function and create the JSX tag for each element in the array like this. Here, we are taking the box array from the state. Let me highlight this and iterating through it using the map function. For each box component in the array, we are returning a JSX to print the corresponding box component. Here, while using the box component, we are passing both the heading text and the color from the state as props. If you remember earlier, we were passing only the heading text via props and not the color, as color was used as a state inside the box component itself. But now, since we have moved the color state up to the app component, we will have to pass the color also via props. Let's now move to the next step, that is, we will remove the state from the box component. So this is our box component code, and now we will remove the state from the box component. Since the color state now belongs to the app component, the color change function should also go inside the app component so that it can communicate with the state data. Hence, it should be removed from here. Now that box has become stateless component, we can convert it into a functional component. And for this, we will have to change the class to an arrow function notation. The function will take props as an argument. We can name it anything. We will also have to remove the render function. Then we will change the color usage to props. And since it is now a functional component, we will use only props instead of this dot props. Similarly, even for the heading text, we will have to make the change accordingly. Now the next challenge is to fix the change color function. Since the color state is now present in the app component, the change color function should also go up inside the app component so that it can communicate with the state color data. But let me remind you that it needs to be called within the box component. So how will it work? We will define the change color function inside the app component. Then we will pass the function to the box component via props along with other state data for it to be accessible inside the box component. Inside the box component, on clicking the button, we will call the function through props. Since we are storing the colors of the boxes together in the form of an array, on button click we will also have to pass an ID to the change color function to identify which box's color should change. So let us see how we can do this. First, we have to store an ID along with the color and heading text in the box array state like this to identify each box distinctively. Let me indent the code also simultaneously. The next step is to add the change color function and make necessary changes. This function makes an additional argument ID which denotes the box whose color needs to change. We are storing the entire boxes array in a new variable named boxes. Then we are making the color change in the respective box and then replacing the state data with this new boxes variable. We will have to pass the function along the ID to each box component via the props. When we pass the function to another component via props, we must bind the function to this object. This is done so that inside the function this should continue to refer to the app class object. Since the change color function will be called from within the box component, the binding will break and this inside the change color function would refer to something else. If the reason is not clear, you can simply remember to bind the function to this whenever we are passing a function to a component via props. Next, we will make necessary changes in the way we are calling the change color function in the box component as well. Since the change color function now is not a part of the box component and is instead sent as a prop, we will call the function using props. We will also pass the ID of the box being passed to it via props on button click so that in the app component, when the change color function executes, it would know which box component to work on. So let us execute this code. There you go. Everything is working exactly the way it was working earlier. Means we have been able to successfully flow the data from top level element to the child level elements. In this video, what we did was we refactored the entire code. Refactoring in simple terms means changing the structure of some existing code without changing the outcome of the code. Now, the next step is to use this refactored code to build the count feature, which we will discuss in the next video. Stay tuned.
After going through this video, you will be able to build the count feature for your web page. Let us continue from where we left, that is, we will now build the count feature. And for this, we will create a new component called stats that will display the count section and will add it at the bottom of the app component.
The stats component would simply display the count of different colored headings. It will print the number of black headings, the number of red headings, and so on. Stats component can get that count information from the state data stored in the app component, that is, the boxes array. So, for that, we will have to pass the entire boxes state via props while using the stats component, like this. Now, if we run the code, it will throw an error. Pause the video here and have a look at the code. Can you think why we got this error? Well, this is because whenever a component returns two or more adjacent elements, they should wrap the elements inside a single parent element, which we have not done in our case. So, let us wrap the elements inside a single parent element like this. The stats component will use the box's state to count the colored headings. The stats component doesn't maintain any state of its own. So, we can define it as a functional component like this. The function takes props as an argument. We fetch the boxes array from the props, iterate through it to check the color of each box and increment the corresponding count accordingly. Then at the end, we display each of the counts. So now it is time to run the code. There you go. Our code is working fine. The stats component looked so simple. It is only because we maintained the state at the top level so that the state information can be shared across any component. You might have found this entire code very complicated. But now, if you want to add one more box with exactly the same functionality, like having a heading, a paragraph, and 4 buttons that would change the color of the heading, we would simply need to add the specific information in the boxes array in the state of the app component. And that's it. Well, this brings us to the end of this topic. This topic is very important in terms of implementing states and to understand how data flows. So, make sure you go through this code again, understand the logic behind every line of code, and execute it on your own. You can find the code for your reference below the video. Up next is a quiz. All the best. After going through this video, you will be able to install Node.js on your system, install Create React App locally, create a React project folder using Create React App. Hi, welcome back. Until now, the code which we have written in the app.js is a JavaScript extension or JSX code, which is technically not a JavaScript code. Browsers do not understand this code, and to help them understand, we included a Babel compiler in the form of a JS file so that the browsers can understand and run the JSX code. So what the browsers do is they first convert the JSX code into JavaScript code that the browsers can understand using the Babel compiler, and then it executes the converted JavaScript code to create the HTML elements. Now, what happens is that the size of the Babel compiler file is around 800 KB. This means that whenever the browser has to convert the JSX code into JS code, it needs to load the file first. Depending on the internet bandwidth, loading this file may take some time, which is not a problem if we are working locally, or we also call it as working in a development mode. But what if the code is put online for the users? Do you think it would be a good user experience? You will probably think of it as not a good idea because the web page will load slowly for the users who are using the internet with low bandwidth, as the browser will first load the Babel.js file that is of 800 KB. So, what should we do to improve the user experience? After all, they are the ones who are going to view the website. For this, we need to set up the Babel compiler locally. And to help us for the same, we have a tool called Create React App that helps us set up Babel locally into our project folder. In fact, Create React App creates an entire folder structure for our React project that would help us maintain our code as the project grows. So let us see how we can set up a React project using Create React App, and we will then make changes to our project accordingly. To set up a React project using the Create React app, we need to first install Node.js and npm on our system. npm is a package manager used by JavaScript developers to install packages on their computer. To install Node.js and npm, we will open the website nodejs.org/en. You can find this link below the video. Here you can see that there are two versions. One is LTS, that is recommended for most users, and the other one is current. We will download the LTS version. We will be able to download both the Node.js and npm through this file only. Click on this button to download the file. This will open a dialog box. Click on Save File. Once you have downloaded the file, double click to install it. When you double click, it will show a warning. Don't worry. Just click OK to proceed. Now, this will open Node.js installation wizard. Click Next and accept the terms of license agreement. I will continue with the default installation location, that is C drive. Again, click on Next. Now, make sure that you select the checkbox Automatically install necessary tools. Click on Next and finally click on Install. The installation might take some time depending on your internet bandwidth. Once the installation is finished, click on Finish. Congratulations! You have successfully installed Node.js and npm on your system. Now that we have installed Node.js and npm, we will open a new instance of command prompt. In the command prompt, enter npm install-g create-react-app to install Create React app. Now, again, depending upon your internet's bandwidth, it might take some time to install the Create React app. You can see that the Create React app is installed. Once the Create React app is installed, we will enter create-react-app project-name to create a React project. Note that I have entered the name as project-test. You can choose any name as you like. This command creates an entire React project folder with the name project-test. This command usually takes 4 to 5 minutes to execute. So while that happens, I am going to grab my cup of Maggi. Now that we have successfully created the React project folder, it will suggest two commands. One is cd space your project name and the other is npm start. Let us enter both these commands one by one. The cd command helps us to get inside the project folder, and the npm command is important because it uses Babel to convert all the JSX code into browser understandable JavaScript code. Runs a web server of its own, and it opens the code on the browser. Let us hit enter and see what happens. Now, this will open a new dialog box asking for access. Click on Allow Access. This will open a new window on your web browser like this. Now, when we create a project using create-react-app, it creates a sample project with some default files and pre-written code. Like in our case, we have created a folder named project-test. This we can find by typing project-test in the search menu. And once we open this folder, we can see some default folders and files. We should start every React project like this and then make changes to the existing files. We won't find the convertible JS code here as the conversion of JSX into JS happens internally and is temporary. This npm start is a temporary way to test our code on the browser. This is like working in the development environment. To get the browser compatible JS code, we will have to build our code, which we will see in the last topic of this module. For now, let us copy everything from our app.js except the React DOM.render part into the app.js file, which is inside the src folder. The reason we are not copying the reaction.render part is because the file src/index.js already contains React DOM.render part. We need to add this line of code at the beginning of src/app.js. Import React from React and export default app at the end of the app.js file. Similarly, we will copy our CSS from app.css into src/index.css. Any changes we make to the code, npm start automatically updates that into the browser. And this is how our project looks like until now. Isn't it beautiful? Well, that was all in this video. Hope you had fun watching this video. After going through this video, you will be able to break React code into modules. Well, kudos to you on almost completing the React module. Before we get into the details of this topic, first have a look at the code which you have written so far in this module. Although this code is organized and written beautifully, don't you think it is way too lengthy for a single file?
means it would have been great if somehow we can break this code into smaller parts for better readability and understanding. So, to help us break our code further into smaller parts, Create React App uses ES module, a feature in JavaScript that allows us to break our code into individual JavaScript files that we can call modules. Modules provide a better way to organize and maintain our code. The idea is to keep each component, that is, app box and stats, in a different file and treat it as an individual module. And when we want to use a component into another component, we will have to explicitly import that module into that module. So without waiting any longer, let us see how we can do this. In our code, we have three components: app, box, and stats. This means we will break this code into three modules, one for each component. So first, let us take the box component out into a separate file and name it as box.js with a capital B. We will create this file inside the src folder and will move the function to it. You can find this src folder inside the project test folder which you have created in the previous topic. Now at the beginning of this file, add import react from React. This is an extremely important line and must be present at the start of every module. It is added so that we can use functions related to React. Also, each module must contain the export default component underscore name at the end of the file so that these modules can be imported and used into other modules. Here, the component name in our case is box, and it will be app and stats in case of app and stats component respectively. So, I've shown you how to create a box module. Similarly, you can create app and stats modules. Make sure you create the files inside the src folder and move the corresponding functions inside these files. Also, don't forget to add the statements import react from React and export default component underscore name at the start and end of each module respectively. Now that we have created modules for each component, let us see how we can use these components. Like in our case, in the app component, we are using box and stats components. So, to use these components, we have to import both box and stats modules inside the app module. For this, we will add import box from box, import stats from stats. This will be added at the top in the app.js file after the import react statement. Also, note that I have added app.css to import the CSS file as well. Now, this line at the top is default and should be present always. And that's all we need to do. The last and final step is to check if our code is running, and for that we will open the command prompt and enter npm start. There you go. You can see the project as we have built it. With this, we have come to the end of this module. In the next module, you will see how we can shape and further structure our website PG Life, which you have been creating as a part of your assignments in various modules. So, there are still plenty of exciting things waiting for you. Up next is a quiz. All the best. See you soon. Welcome to the last topic of the React module, building the React project. In the 8th topic of this module, we created a React project-test using the Create React app. Now this project works in a standalone manner, that is, it has its own server. If you notice the URL, it is localhost:3000. And if you remember earlier, we were using 127.0.0.1 to run the files locally. So you can see that the Create React app uses its own server to run the project. Now, as we are done with the coding part, it is time to build the project. To do this, we will open the command prompt and will go inside the project folder. In my case, the file path is cd/user/aditya/sood/project-test. Next, we will run the command npm run build to build the project. This will generate a build folder inside the project test folder. Next, we will copy this build folder and paste it inside the htdocs folder so that it can be directly accessed by the browser. I have renamed this folder as project build. You can name it as anything you want. The next step is to open this folder using VS Code Editor. To do this, click on this folder icon and select the folder to open. Now, we will open this index.html file through which we will be able to access the project. A quick tip for Windows users: if you need to auto format the file, press Ctrl plus A to select the entire document code, then press Ctrl plus K and Ctrl plus F to auto format the file. And if you are using a Linux or Mac OS, press Ctrl plus Alt plus I or CMD plus Alt plus I respectively to auto format the file. Now, here you can see it includes 2 JavaScript files and 1 CSS file. These files are alternatively present inside the static folder. We need to change the way we are including these files as we are keeping our project in a subfolder. So, we will remove the first / from all these files and will save it. Now, if we enter 127.0.0.1/project build, we will be able to open the project using the browser, that is, using Apache. But make sure that your Apache is in running state before entering this URL. There you go, your project is running the way it was earlier. Now you might be wondering, why did we use create React app? Because we started with Apache and then moved away from Apache and then build and brought it back. Well, using create React app creates a folder structure that's more organized when we work on a large project. Also, compiling JSX into JavaScript using Babel on the browser would make our website very slow. So using create React app helps to overall organize the folder structure, and it makes creating the React project so simple. Well, that was all about building the project in this video. Make sure that you follow the steps as shown in the video and build your own project. Up next is a module test. All the best.
Hi there. Thanks for taking the web development training with Intershala. In this training, you learned and practiced 7 different web technologies, which is a big achievement in itself. All these web technologies can be applied to create a functional website from scratch. No matter where you go, every company or organization has its own technical team that always looks for passionate and bright minds in the field of web development. Also, it entirely depends upon you, what you want to become. In this training, we have taught you an array of web technologies. So, you can either choose to become a front-end web developer, a back-end web developer, or a full-stack web developer. In fact, if you check our Fresher Jobs portal, you will find jobs listed in the web development domain with good starting packages. So you can go ahead and apply for one of those jobs, or even apply for internships in the field. Also, if you search online and explore the starting salaries of a full-stack developer, it is minimum 6 LPA, and this number is increasing day by day due to more businesses coming online and the gradual increase in demand. Well, that was a bit about career prospects in web development. Now, let us quickly sum up what you have learned so far in this training. You started with HTML, where you understood some basics of web development and learned how to write an HTML code using a few HTML tags. Then in the next module, CSS, you learned how to style, that is, beautify the HTML page. Here, you learned different ways of styling and one of the most important concepts, how to create a page layout. In this module, you were given an assignment where you had coded a few pages of the PG Life web application using HTML and CSS. In the next module, Bootstrap, you explored some predefined classes in Bootstrap and learned how to create a layout of a web page. You also implemented Bootstrap to the PG Life web application, where you added some design elements like carousel, header, modals, filters, and many more without any hassle as a part of your assignment. Then in the next module, that is DBMS, you installed MySQL and executed various SQL queries to create tables or delete data from these tables and much more. Here, you were also given an assignment where you created the PG Life database, created tables inside this database, and added data to it. Next, you learned one more backend web technology, that is PHP, where you learned a few basics like variables, operators, loops, functions, cookies, etc. Not only this, you created a few PHP files to store and fetch data from a database. Again, in this module, you were given an assignment where you coded the application using PHP. Further, in the JavaScript module, you learned similar concepts that you learned in PHP. Additionally, you also learned how to capture user action using an event listener and much more exciting things. In the next module, React, you learned the basics of React and understood why it is used. And as you progressed in this module, you created an entire React project using Create React App and finally deployed it. Well, that's not the end of this training. It is time to apply your knowledge into practice and code the remaining PG Life web application. And for this, we have created an entire module for you to practice and implement your skills. Here, you will first code the remaining part of the PG Life web application using HTML, CSS, DBMS, PHP, and JavaScript web technologies. And then, you will create one complete web page of this web application using React. To help you get started with the coding part, we have given you a few starting codes for some web pages along with their explanations. So please go through these videos and use the same logic while doing exercises given in this module. And lastly, after completing this module, you will have your final test. Make sure you revise all the concepts thoroughly before attempting the test, because only after completing this test, you will get your training certificate. All in all, it was an amazing and fun-filled journey with you. Hope you had a great experience watching these videos. And remember, there is never an end to learning. So keep learning and keep shining. All the very best for your future.